Rook didn't report what happened at the Ashfall Gate. He didn't have to. 3 separate people who owed the Chalk Row Combine favors saw a slaghound get filed into a drainage grate like a piece of paperwork, and by the next morning, the story had already grown a life of its own. By the 3rd telling, Do-hyun had apparently negotiated with the monster. By the 5th, he'd find it. Foreman Yule, who ran Chalk Row's collections for 6 reclamation zones and had never once lost sleep over any of them, heard the 4th version over breakfast and put his spoon down very slowly. "A 0-rated steward," he said, "embarrassed one of my collectors in front of an entire zone." His second didn't answer, because there wasn't a version of that sentence that ended well for anyone standing near Yule when he said it. "Fix it," Yule said. "Quietly, if it can still be quiet. Loudly, if it can't." Do-hyun, 3 streets away and blissfully unaware he'd just become a business problem for a man who solved problems with hunter-rated enforcers, was having a considerably better morning. He was doing a head count. Territory, Ashfall Yard. Population, 22 registered citizens plus 9 overnight. DP generated, 31 per day. Tier 0 stability, rising. Tier 1 threshold at 50 registered citizens. Word traveled fast in a zone with nothing to do but talk, and the story that traveled fastest wasn't the monster. It was the food. 22 people now split their rations through Han's supply system instead of scavenging alone, and a settlement that shared food, it turned out, was a settlement that ate better than one that didn't. That was the whole secret. Nobody had a cheat code for survival. Do-hyun just had a spreadsheet, and it turned out spreadsheets were exactly what starving people had been missing. 2 of the new arrivals walked straight up to him with their transfer papers still creased from the fold. "Miriam," said the first, a wiry woman with ink-stained fingers. "Class, cartographer. Before you ask, no, I can't fight. I can draw a map of a battlefield so accurate you'll know where to stand before the fighting starts. And every officer in the City Watch laughed me out of the recruiting hall for it. I'm going to need every map you own," Do-hyun said immediately, and watched her blink in genuine surprise at being taken seriously. The second was a broad-shouldered kid, maybe 17, with a 3-legged mutt on a rope leash that was growling softly at absolutely nothing anyone else could see. "Jion, beast handler. Combat rating's a joke, same as yours, but Biscuit here starts barking about 10 seconds before anything with rift blood gets close. Saved my life twice." Do-hyun looked at the growling dog, and then at the drainage grate still faintly smoking from last night, and felt something click into place in the back of his mind, the specific, satisfying click of a man realizing 2 useless-sounding pieces fit together into something that wasn't useless at all. "Mira," he said, "I need a map of every choke point in this yard. Jion, I need to know exactly how far out Biscuit can smell trouble." "Why?" Mira asked. "Because," Do-hyun said, pulling out his ledger, "I think we're about to have visitors, and I'd very much like this place to be extremely bad news for them." Here's a world rule nobody in the Ashfall Yard had ever had a reason to think about, because nobody had ever had anything worth defending. Junk isn't just junk. 3 years of dumped scrap, collapsed shacks, and half-buried scaffolding had turned the yard into an accidental maze, twisting, narrow, choked with debris in places wide enough for 2 people to pass and nowhere else. To everyone who'd ever lived there, it was an eyesore. To an administrator with a cartographer's map spread across a crate and a dog that could smell trouble coming, it was the best free fortification in the entire district. "Right here," Do-hyun said, tapping a spot on Mira's hastily drawn map, where 3 scrap corridors bottlenecked into one. "Anyone coming through the north approach funnels straight through this gap. If we can't stop them with numbers, we make sure numbers don't matter." DP threshold reached. Tier 0 public works expanded. Available. Choke barricade. Cost 60 DP. Available. Alarm net. Cost 35 DP. Current DP, 31. 95 points of infrastructure standing between a growing settlement and whatever Chalk Row decided to send, and 31 points in the bank. Do-hyun did the math twice, hoping he'd gotten it wrong the first time. He hadn't. "We need 64 more DP," he told Han, "and I have a very bad feeling we don't have long to get it." He was right to worry. Old Bori's contact in the scrap trade, a courier who moved between zones and heard everything, because nobody thinks twice about talking in front of a man carrying garbage, found Do-hyun that same evening, out of breath, having run the whole way. "Chalk Row's sending a collection squad," the courier said. "Real one. Draven's leading it. Hunter-rated. D-tier confirmed kills. Used to run debt enforcement for 3 zones before Yule poached him. They're not coming to collect dues, kid. They're coming to make an example." "When?" 2 nights. Maybe less." Do-hyun looked at the number in his head. 64 DP. 2 nights. No way to hit it through normal trade. And then looked at the pile of scrap Old Bori's team had been slowly sorting for 3 weeks, worth exactly nothing to the yard, and quite a lot to a legitimate buyer, if anyone in this city would legitimately buy from a reclamation zone. "Nobody in Verrow will trade fairly with us," he said slowly, "because we're a reclamation zone. But we're not anymore. We're a registered, self-administered territory. That's a legal distinction nobody's ever bothered to test." Han's eyebrows went up. "You want to sell scrap to actual city merchants, as a district, officially." "I want to sell scrap to actual city merchants," Do-hyun agreed, already writing, "as a district that files paperwork faster than they can find a reason to refuse it." It worked. Mostly because it was so bureaucratically boring that nobody who might have objected on principle had the patience to actually object. By the following evening, 3 loaded carts of sorted scrap had become a small, unglamorous, extremely necessary pile of DP. DP threshold reached, 96 of 96. Choke barricade. Built. Alarm net. Built. Tier 0 stability. Rising. Do-hyun stood at the mouth of the newly reinforced choke point that night, looking at a wall of stacked, welded scrap that hadn't existed 48 hours earlier, and allowed himself exactly one small, tired smile. "Zoning," he told Han, "wins wars nobody thought it could." He would find out, in about 6 hours, exactly how close that statement came to being wrong. Biscuit started barking a little after midnight, and Jian was awake and shouting a warning before the sound had even finished echoing off the scrap heaps. Draven's squad hit the north approach exactly where Do-hyun had gambled they would, because it was the only approach wide enough to look easy from the outside, and ran directly into 96 development points of very deliberate bad news. The choke barricade folded their formation down to single file. Citizens who'd never held a weapon in their lives threw scavenged rebar and bottled oil from the scaffolding above, not because Do-hyun had trained an army in 2 days, but because he'd spent 2 days making sure an army wasn't required. For 3 enforcers, it worked beautifully. Draven was not 3 enforcers. He came through the barricade's gap like it was a suggestion, D-tier strength turning a wall of welded scrap into scattered debris with 2 swings of a cleaver the size of a door, and the citizens who'd been so confident 30 seconds earlier scattered in a panic that Do-hyun couldn't blame them for at all. "Steward!" Draven roared, scanning the crowd, already knowing exactly who he was looking for. "Yule sends his regards!" Do-hyun had, in this exact moment, a combat rating of 0 and a rapidly shrinking list of options. He did the only thing his class had ever let him do. He bought time. "You're standing in a registered municipal territory," he called out, voice far steadier than he felt, stalling with the only weapon he had left, while Han pulled panicking citizens back out of Draven's reach. Attacking a self-administered district under Verrow's own reclamation charter. I have that in writing. I filed it myself. That's adorable, Draven said, and closed the distance in a single stride that told Do-hyun with perfect clarity that this was the part where paperwork stopped working. The strike never landed. Ice bloomed across the ground between them in a spiral of pale blue frost, climbing Draven's cleaver arm to the elbow before he'd even registered the cold, and a figure dropped from the scaffolding above in a fall that should have broken both her ankles, and somehow didn't, boots skidding to a stop between Do-hyun and a very confused, very furious enforcer whose weapon arm was no longer listening to him. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The frost pattern climbing Draven's arm carried a signature that anyone who'd spent time around real magic would recognize instantly. Clean, layered, precise in a way street mages never managed. And for one bad second, before she yanked her hood back up, the firelight caught a mark tattooed at the base of her throat. A spire, wreathed in frost. Draven took one look at that mark and made a decision that had nothing to do with courage. "This isn't worth it," he said, already backing toward the broken barricade, cradling his frozen arm. "You'll can find someone else to collect from a frostspire washout." He was gone before anyone thought to stop him, squad scrambling after him through the wreckage of Do-hyun's carefully built choke point, and the yard went very quiet, in the way places do right after they realize they've survived something they shouldn't have. The woman in the hood was already halfway up the scaffolding, moving like someone who'd made a serious mistake and knew it. "Wait!" Do-hyun started, and she was already gone. He stood there a long moment, staring at the spot where she'd vanished, and felt something shift behind his eyes that had nothing to do with the fight at all. Territorial defense. Successful. Hostile force repelled. Citizen cohesion milestone reached. Administrator's mandate. Personal scaling unlocked. Old. Combat rating 0. No personal combat scaling. New. Plus 2% of aggregate territory defense reflected as passive administrator trait. Territory sense 1. Passively sense hostile intent within claimed land. Radius scaling with territory tier. Why it matters. For the first time, growth in the settlement is growth in you. The bigger Ashfall gets, the less 0 that rating actually means. He read it twice. Then a third time, because the first 2 times he genuinely thought his eyes were playing tricks born of adrenaline and very little sleep. He wasn't going to punch harder tomorrow than he had today. He still couldn't. But somewhere, faintly, at the very edge of his awareness, he could feel the whole shape of the yard around him. Every citizen, every claimed inch of ground, like a held breath he hadn't known he was capable of feeling before tonight. 0 rated, he said quietly, to nobody. Doesn't mean what they think it means. Nobby, who'd been hiding behind a crate through the entire fight and was now creeping back out looking equal parts terrified and thrilled, tugged his sleeve. "Who was that? The ice lady?" "I don't know," Do-hyun admitted, "but I intend to find out." He did not, however, chase her. Not that night, and not the next morning, though half the yard wanted to, buzzing with theories about the mysterious savior with the frost tattoo. Mira had already sketched a rough map of the direction she'd fled. Gi-yeon offered, seriously, to have Biscuit track her scent. Do-hyun shook his head at both. If she wanted to be found by force, she wouldn't have run. We don't chase people here. We make it easier to stay than to leave. So instead of a manhunt, he wrote a note. Plain, no demands, no questions about the tattoo he'd absolutely noticed, and left it pinned to a post at the alley where the frost trail finally faded out, alongside a full ration share and a copy of Ashfall's freshly drafted citizen charter. Whoever you are, thank you. There's a place here if you want it. No questions asked until you're ready to ask them yourself. Kang Do-hyun, Ashfall Yard. He didn't see her read it, but somebody did. 12 miles across the city, in an office considerably nicer than anything the Ashfall Yard had ever seen, a woman known to Chalk Row's rank and file only as the broker set down Foreman Yule's failure report and read the line about a frostspire mark with an interest that had absolutely nothing to do with lost collection revenue. A washout mage protecting a 0-rated administrator, she murmured, in a reclamation zone that shouldn't be worth protecting at all. She tapped one manicured nail against a second document already open on her desk, an old survey, decades out of date, showing a resource deposit buried beneath a district everyone in Verrow had long since written off as worthless. Yule thought he was punishing an insult. He has no idea what he almost dug up. She smiled, slow and unhurried, and reached for a pen. "Send flowers to the boy," she said, "and find out everything there is to know about him, before someone smarter than Yule does." In the alley behind the noteboard, Yoon So-yeon stood in the shadows for a long time after the yard had gone quiet for the night, reading 11 words over and over, until they stopped feeling like a trap and started, terrifyingly, to feel like an offer. There's a place here if you want it. Frostspire had taken her rank, her name, and every reason she'd ever had to trust an institution again. This ridiculous, half-built garbage heap of a district had a 0-rated steward who just handed her the exact opposite of an institution. A plain wooden noteboard, a ration share she hadn't earned yet, and no questions. She stepped out of the alley, into the low firelight still burning near the yard's gate, and let her hood fall back for the first time where anyone could see her face. "I'm not staying," she said, when Do-hyun turned and found her standing there like she'd simply always been part of the scene. "I'm just here to see if the note was serious." Do-hyun looked at her for a long moment, at the frost-pale eyes, the exhaustion under them that had nothing to do with one night's fight. The way her hand hadn't quite stopped hovering near a weapon she clearly expected to need again soon. "It was serious," he said simply. "So, are you staying?" She didn't answer right away, but she didn't leave either.